Greetings, everyone. This is the Alternative Guy back here again with another video. This video is going to be about this book that I've read, and it's called That the Blood Stay Pure. And the reason why I think it's so important is because Dr. Erica L. Coleman, she, out of all of the books that I've read in reference to the whole situation with the development of race and the origin of how white supremacy or the European developing this hierarchy of color, Dr. Coleman thoroughly documents the history of how this development took place, and especially in Virginia, where I am now. And Dr. Coleman also deals with this the history of this whole Native American, American Indian, the mixing of the races, the whole mulatto thing, how all of this stuff came about, and how in Virginia you had these laws where they didn't want racial mixing during that time, and they really had a problem with either the American Indians mixing with the so-called African slaves. And so you had all of this mixing and mingling together. And she goes into how we can understand how all of these identifications came about. And you have to realize that the European was doing all of this. He was identifying everybody, but he also at the same time was keeping himself at the top of this ladder. Virginia has a real ugly history when it comes down to slavery and the whole 9 yards. And she goes into like details, even dealing with President Thomas Jefferson, and she's not just talking off the top of her head. She's dealing with facts. She has receipts. The book is full of receipts, and that's what's so important about it. You know, it's not like somebody just playing on your emotions. She's dealing with documented, statutes, legislature that took place within the Virginia government. And it goes all the way back to like even she talks about with the Portuguese and the French and the Spanish, and then she works her way up to when the British came. So we gotta understand that the British was the most successful because here we are in the country of America. So I'm telling you, this book is very, very vital for any melanated person in this country and even in the world to understand this whole thing about race. So I'm encouraging you to get a copy of this book and read it thoroughly. So now what I want to do, I want to share with you a video of Dr. Erica Coleman being interviewed by this lady at the Woodrow Wilson House. And you'll get a good picture of her thinking and her information by watching this video. So you might want to watch it to the end because it's a very good, thorough video. So stay tuned.
Hello, and welcome to the Woodrow Wilson House Lunch and Learn Speaker Series. My name is Elizabeth Karcher, and it's my pleasure to have you today. We're going to have Dr. Erica Coleman speak to us today about her book, That the Blood Stay Pure. Dr. Erica Coleman is an award-winning, nationally recognized American historian and independent scholar whose research focuses on comparative ethnic studies and issues of racial formation and identity. Her additional research interests include indigeneity, immigration, migration, interracial relations, mixed race identity, race and gender intersections, sexuality, the politics of race and science, and popular culture. She received her doctorate in American Studies from the Union Institute and University in 2005. She completed her postdoctoral fellowship in scholarly information resources and Africana studies at Johns Hopkins University. She was also a summer Mellon Fellow for the Future of Minority Studies Consortium at Cornell University. She's held faculty appointments in Africana Studies at Widener University, the University of Delaware, and Johns Hopkins University. She has been a faculty facilitator for the UNCF Mellon Faculty Fellows Domestic Summer Institute. She has spoken far and wide at a number of other institutes across the states. She has lectured and presented papers at academic and public venues, including the Organization of American Historians, the American Historical Association, the Association for the Study of African American Life and History, MIT's Conference on Race and Science, the National Holocaust Museum, the Virginia Forum, and now today, the Woodrow Wilson House. She has lent her expertise on matters of race and ethnicity to the Virginia General Assembly House Rules Committee, NPR, the Washington Post, the New York Times, Time Magazine, and many other articles and publications. Dr. Coleman's first book, That the Blood Stay Pure, African Americans, Native Americans, and the Predicament of Race and Identity in Virginia, a Choice Outstanding Academic title for 2014, traces the history and legacy of Virginia's efforts to maintain racial purity and the consequences of this almost 400-year effort on African American, Native American relations and kinship bonds in the Commonwealth. With that, I would like to introduce Dr. Erica Coleman. Welcome, and thank you for joining us today during this important month of Native American Heritage Month. So our pleasure to have you here.
Good afternoon, everybody. I apologize for being a little late coming in. Now we're here, and we're here in this crazy, what should I say? Oh, what a country. I'll put it that way. Oh, what a country. This is the paradox that we are in, because so many of us still believe, or at least we say we believe, in the ideals that this country was founded on. Now, understand, we the people did not include most of the people. And so it did not include African Americans. It did not include Native Americans. It did not include women of any color. Okay, it did not include, poor whites. And that again goes to this issue of the American paradox and how we situate bodies. How we say, you go here, you go here. You hear a lot now about identity politics, but that's really what founded this country. Okay, who belonged and who did not. Okay, and so let me say this, because this is Native American History Month, and we just celebrated. For some people, it was Columbus Day. For other people, it was Indigenous Peoples Day. Okay, Now, I'm just going to be right clear with you. I'm on the side of Indigenous Peoples Day. I celebrate Indigenous Peoples Day. Okay. Not only because I am African American and Native American Rappahannock Indian. Yes, I know. And when people say to me, because they look at me and they're like, "You don't look like an Indian." That's because you watch too much Turner Classic TV. Turn that TV off. Turn that TV off. But Turner Classic TV really has us really, has so, ingrained in our minds, what it means to be an Indian, what an Indian looks like, and, they walk around in buckskin and beads and feathers all day and the whole 9 yards. And that's not true. And I've been in situations where particularly a friend of mine who is the chief of the Nottoway Indian tribe of Virginia, they are Afro-Indian. Okay, they would not deny the other part of them or any part of them. They're also white. They're also, I mean, they mix and match with people. This is what we do. And understand, folks, that in what they call interracial marriage, that is the exception. Interracial sex is the rule. So no matter, how much we have, had these, what we call anti-miscegenation laws, which was originally called, used the term amalgamation, so-called mixing of the races. And, all of these prescriptions, against that, what I call it's what I call the study of boinkology. And it's, people who are saying, the powers that be, okay, in order to keep the blood pure, okay, you can boink with that person, but you can't boink with that person. Or boinkology. Okay. So, we have set these rules up, but, people have been boinking back and forth, and it doesn't make a difference how many laws you set up. People are not going to adhere to those laws. So then the interesting thing, even from the very beginning, when there was, this idea of, keeping the white race pure, there were no prescriptions against African American and Native American people. As I say, boinking. Cohabitating, coming together, having children together. I'm trying to keep this PG. So so the interesting thing is that you had, the English who came to Virginia really was called Sina-Kumaka. And actually, this was known as Turtle Island. Okay, not Virginia. So they didn't come to Virginia. They came to Sina-Kumaka. No, I'm not going to try to spell that for you. Let's move on. So they came to Sina-Kumaka. Okay, and then you had the Puritans, the Pilgrims that came to the Massachusetts Bay Area. Again, Turtle Island. Who didn't come here to this continent was Christopher Columbus. He never stepped foot on what we now know as North America. He did not. And so, how do we get into this whole thing of celebrating, Columbus Day? Real quick. The Italians, who were treated awful here when they first came here. If you were from Southern or Eastern Europe, you were not considered white. What we were dealing with and have been dealing with is really Anglo-Saxon superiority. Okay. So then, if you were not from the North and the West, then you were not considered white when you came to the United States. And so the Italians were treated horribly as a way, as all groups did, to come under this umbrella of whiteness, then basically, you know, they made deals. They made deals. And so actually the Italian community lobbied FDR to make Columbus Day a national holiday. And it had been celebrated like for the 300th anniversary. Okay, but it was not a national holiday until 1937. Okay, so then that's how we got that day off. Okay, or some of us, not all of us. But that's why we observe. But it was because of the lobbying. But again, Columbus never stepped foot here. So you know, we call this period, this historical period that we're living in now, we call it a time of reckoning. But there's always been a time of reckoning in the United States because there's always been this pushback. People just did not accept labels, did not accept their condition of slavery or, you know, indentured servitude. People, it is human nature to resist. Now, some did. Some did. I mean, people negotiate these spaces any kind of way that they think is going to benefit them. So then you had some, you know, who became Christians and, you know, told the line, the whole 9 yards. If there was going to be an insurrection, they would tell the powers that be. This is what happened with Denmark Vesey, okay, and that insurrection. So this is what happened with, you know, Gabriel Posner and that insurrection. You know, somebody, as we used to say back in the day, dropped a dime, okay, and then they were rewarded for that, you know, for being, you know, this, you know, good and faithful servant. But then there were a lot of people, and one of the things that we don't talk about are the many insurrections that happened during the time of slavery. And this is really important because guess what, folks? The first slave insurrection happened in Virginia in 1701. When African Americans and Native Americans got together, and yes, those Native Americans were slaves. That's another part of the story that people miss out on. Black people were not the first slaves in this hemisphere, were the indigenous population here. Now, people like to say, oh, well, that didn't quite work out because, you know, they had a weaker constitution. Well, then they brought Africans in because they had a stronger constitution. Also, you know, I mean, in other words, you know, African people were more fit, were more physically fit to endure the violence of slavery. But the interesting thing is that, and the other story that's told is that, well, the Native American people, they knew the land. So because they knew the land, then they could easily escape. Well, that's if you were kept in the same vicinity where you lived. But that is not what happened. African peoples and Native American peoples were both on the auction block. Being sold on the auction block, you had, and just like, you know, you had certain African tribes that worked with the various, you know, European factions, the Dutch, the British, the English, the Spanish, in order to, you know, capture Africans and, you know, get them to the Atlantic so they can be transported, you know, to various parts of the Americas. Actually, the United States received less enslaved Africans than, say, Latin America and the Caribbean and all of these other places. Okay, but I mean, we don't think that because, you know, right now we're the center of the world. Let me also remind you that, you know, we are only 5% of the world's population. Think about that. The United States is only 5% of the world's population. So the thing that we credit Columbus for is that when he sailed the ocean blue and he got lost and found himself what we call butt naked last in the Americas. And why do we say that? Because there were people who were already here. I don't see how you can discover something when somebody else has already been there for eons and eons and eons. Okay, so this is, and this is the myth that people are pushing back upon. Now, one more thing about Columbus, it's interesting because go back to the first grade. Think about the first grade when you were taught about Columbus. And, your teacher stood there, and said, oh, with those long pointers or whatever that they used to have. And, he or she told you, oh, yes, Christopher Columbus discovered America because when he was from, everybody believed the world was flat. And he said, no, the world is round. I'm going to prove it to you. So he gets in, his ship, and then brings two others with him. And, he discovers, of course, that the world is indeed round. That is not what Christopher Columbus said. Everybody knew the world was round. In his day, everybody knew to go read the writings of Christopher Columbus. Everybody believed that the world was round. Christopher Columbus wrote back to Spain and said, for all of you who believe that the world is round, you're wrong. The world is shaped like a woman's breast, and I am sailing towards the nipple. That is what he said. Now, of course, you can't teach that to first graders. I know my mother would have been upset. You said what? And my mother was always up at the school. You think, no, that was not going to happen. Okay, but what we do know about Columbus is that his so-called discovery actually brought numerous peoples together and really started this really expanded the Atlantic slave trade, and then merged that slave trade with the Native American slave trade, because the Indians began to partner with various factions. Like you had the Westos up in the Hudson area, and they partnered with the English. Now, here's the problem with, the Indians knew the land. Not if you're being transported from the Hudson all the way to Florida, to the Caribbean, to Europe, to West Africa. Let that sink in. To West Africa. Well, these folks were being, just like African peoples, were being transported, and no matter, where they ran, you were still in America. Okay, the same thing happened with Native Americans. So understand that the relationship or the contact, the initial contact between African peoples and Native American peoples was forged under settler colonialism. And Native peoples saw African peoples as interlopers, just as they saw Europeans as interlopers. And they wanted their country back. Okay, let's just be real about it. But, what happened, of course, is that what is interesting is that, and let me just say this too, there is no monolithic African, people. There are no monolithic Native American people. You had a lot of different nations. Okay, they had different languages, different religions. Okay. Different customs. Okay, so when Europeans try to absolve themselves of slavery, they'll say, well, African people sold their own people into slavery. Well, yes and no. Yes and no. Depending on whose viewpoint you're going from. If you're going from a worldview of a European who just thinks that everybody is connected and the same based on phenotype, based on, the area of initial contact. Well, yeah, you can say that. I guess that's fair, but that's wrong because there is no identity, collective identity. So even today, as being Native American, these were, very specific nations that were just clumped into one. Okay. So when we get to Virginia, and we get to the Powhatan people and a number of others, remember, it's a problem when people try to make it seem like that before the white man came, there was tranquility and peace, and you didn't. Okay. You loved together, you fought together, you had enemy tribes, and this is how the Europeans were so instrumental in getting this divine and rule down pat, because people were enemies. So then, would you help me to fight these enemy Indians? Absolutely. Same thing in Africa. Would you help me to, subdue this particular tribe? Absolutely, because you didn't see each other as one. So then there was no collective Black, no collective white, no collective red. Okay, all of that came with the invention of whiteness. Okay, because you could no longer use religion, because if you have Indian people and African people becoming Christians, how are you going to keep them enslaved? How are you going to keep them, on reservations? Okay, and so this is what happened in Virginia. The Virginia Indians saw Black people as interlopers the same way that they did white people initially. Mm-hmm. But then alliances began to forge, because once they really got to interact with each other and began to understand each other, and the language barrier was taken care of, then they realized how much they culturally had in common. And so then these alliances were forced. Okay, so then people are, coming together, people are, marrying and cohabitating in the whole 9 yards. And see, then what the English population did, they were like, oh no, wait a minute. So, I mentioned very briefly this 1701 insurrection that happened in Virginia with African Americans and Native Americans who were saying, we have had enough of this. Okay. Now, here is how the animosity came about again. Because these two people were mixing and mingling. Okay. Then what the powers that be said was, oh, you've been mixing with these Africans, so then you are no longer Indian, and therefore you have no right to this land. You have forfeited your right to the land. And so then this is what began to happen in Virginia, this land grab. Okay. The Gangaskin were first, which happened in the early 19th century. The effort to take the reservation started around 1783. Okay. But then by 1811, they had lost their reservation. Now, here's the other thing. So not only are they losing their reservation and they're losing their identity as Indian people, that meant they could also be enslaved. And so you had people, so we're talking the Eastern Shore, that's what the Gaskin were. Well, the folks on the mainland, they look in and they're like, oh no. And so by the late 19th century, and then there was still this effort of trying to take the land. I'm gonna mention briefly the Pamunkey Indians because they were the first Powhatan people who received federal recognition in 2016. Okay, and what people call famously call Pocahontas's people. Okay, but finally they got federally recognized. Well, they tried to take their reservation, same reason, in the 1840s, and they had to defend against that. So then by the 1880s, the Pamunkey had put together their bylaws and the whole 9 yards. And the first bylaw was you cannot intermarry with Negroes. You can only marry white. And that's been the rule ever since. And so then what I do is, and that the blood stay pure, I look at that history from the early beginnings of the Virginia colony up until about 2012, up until about 2012, okay? Because people need to understand how people internalize the racist values of mainstream America. Now, and this is an issue and a problem that is coast to coast. I talk about Virginia, okay? This is out west. This is, in the Northeast, okay? But that's not to say that every tribe does that, okay? The last chapter in my book, the Nottoway Indian tribe of Virginia, okay? I'm just going to say this 2 minutes. The Indian Native American tribe of Virginia, those were the folks who received state recognition, but they refused to deny that they had African ancestry. They said, we have African ancestry, we have white ancestry, and probably some others, and we are Indian people, but we're not going to deny all that who we are. Same thing with the Shinnecock in New York, in Southampton, New York, okay? They spent like 30 years trying to get federally recognized. And one of their biggest problems was because they refused to deny Blackness. So this is all to say that, because I know we're also in the science age. I don't have time to get into it, and the DNA age. And to be quite frank with you, there is no test to tell you if you are or are not Native American. There is no test to tell you where you came from in Africa. It's not. It's not. It's a multi-billion-dollar hoax is what it is. It's recreational science. So when people tell me, well, I took a DNA test, really? And it said, okay. But that's not race. Who we are when we check that box is because of what the federal government has determined, not by anything that is flowing in your veins. Because from the lightest light to the darkest dark, and remember in 2000 was, that big controversy about the census, and are we going to have a mixed race category? And I'm like, sure. And everybody checked that box, everybody. Everybody. I don't care who you are. I don't care where you're from. I don't care what you look like. Check. Because we are all somehow, there's no such thing as a pure race. There's no such thing as race. We are all the human race. But what has happened in the last 400, 500 years is this, inserting or inscribing onto bodies by these very superficial appearances. Your phenotype, okay, so you're Black and you're white and you're this and you're that. And it's interesting, and I'm gonna close with this. It's very interesting because when I'm back, that gorgeous woman man killer. That's it. Woman man killer, who was the modern day first female principal chief of the Cherokee of Oklahoma. She said, one of the things that surprised me when I came to the South was that I saw people who identified as African American. She said, but I can look at them and tell you're Creek, you're Cherokee, you're Seminole, you're Oneida, you're, And she said, the problem is that because of the acceptance of the relationship between whites and Indians, and that you can be white and still be and of Indian heritage and still be Indian. But, and this goes to, again, definitions. But you've heard of that term, the one drop rule. Okay, one drop of black blood makes you black. And unfortunately, it's the biggest myth because there's no such thing as black blood. There's no such thing as white blood. There's no such thing. If we all pinch our fingers, I'm not gonna have you do it. If I say everybody pinch your finger and squeeze, you know what's gonna come out? Everybody gonna be red. The only thing that's different is some of you are gonna be A, and some of you are gonna be, O positive. That's the only difference. So this whole invention of race has us reeling and going still to this day. But be clear, it's not biology, it's politics. So as Stuart Hall said, when you think about race, think less about biology and more about politics. But understand, it's the politics of race that has kept us divided, that has kept us fighting, that has kept us apart. Myth of it. And I'm gonna stop right there.
Thank you. That very, as I've read it is brave statements. It is boldly written, boldly argued. And so we thank you for that. And sometimes this is such a taboo conversation, a taboo topic. So one of the goals that we have on these Lunch and Learn is to bring up subjects that we might not necessarily have learned in school. And so I thank you, Dr. Coleman, for enlightening us on your approach and your ideas. Some questions have come in. One is on this sense of if you have these established hierarchies within these groups and there's not a question of race, then why do we use the word, or why do Native Americans use the word tribe?
Well, that's again a European imposition, the term tribe. Okay, because they refer to themselves as First Peoples, nations. They did not refer to themselves as tribe until European contact. Okay. So yeah.
Then do Native Americans consider themselves pure within their jurisdictions, within their tribe?
I understand. See, that's, yes. Only if they maintain. Now, see, again, all of this is why we have to talk about settler colonialism, because all of this became a reality as a part of settler colonialism, where identities were shifted. I mean, like I said, there was no such thing as a red race. Okay. And it took up until about the late 18th century for Native people to begin to refer to themselves as red people. Okay. But the truth is that, Indian. Let's be real about it. Columbus was lost and was wrong. But, we give him a pass, and, we call these folks Indians. We call the people in India Indians, and then in the Caribbean, they're the West Indies. That's the West Indies. There was no such thing as that before. So this is what I'm saying.
Well, I think one of our questions came in, and this relates to this. If you don't have that etymology, if you don't have the use of words, how do you have this discussion? How do you have these are problems. We face these problems when we talk about race. But if you don't use certain terms to describe the issues, what's your definition or what's your solution for a language on discussing race?
Oh, yes. Thank you. That is a most excellent question, because understand that race works like a language. Toni Morrison talked about what the difficulty, the struggle that she had with using a language that was embedded with, discrimination and hierarchies and the whole 9 yards. And so this is how, race continues to operate like a language. Okay. And so, you take the word, like Negro. Okay. That term comes from the Spanish, right? Okay. The English adopted it. But here's the thing. The English adopted it and they called people who were Native American Negro. There was no designation for Indians in the United States up until the 1870 census. So from 1790 census on up, this is why people, particularly in the East, who are looking for that I designation, you're not going to find it. And so we use language to kind of determine the temperature. This is why when people were saying that, Trump's rhetoric was irrelevant, it's not true, because of the fact that we use the language in order to reinforce these levels of hierarchy. And so then what we're trying to do is what Morrison says, free up the language. And how do we free that language up? We interrogate it. We interrogate that. So, where do we get the term whiteness? How did that come about? Because white people did not colonize these different places. Now the Dutch did, the Swedes did, the English did. You see what I'm saying? We lose that specificity. So then we use this language in order to make things look natural and normal. Let me give you a real quick example. When Ronald Reagan came into office, okay, and this is like right on the end of civil rights movement. Okay, you went from the civil rights to this whole colorblind ideology. All they did was change the language. So, you say, you don't say black, you don't say the N word, you say urban.
So I have to say, when you talk, and there's a European, maybe a white centric or an American or English centric saying, and that is one language, one person, two languages, two people. That is seen as a compliment to someone. It is seen as something that says, you speak two languages, you actually have two identities, two understandings, two sensibilities. What I'm hearing is that using that is actually almost a negative in this world of having this identity, having that. You see the difference?
Yes, but this is the politics. This is the politics.
But that's not, when they say that about one language, one person, two languages, two people, that's not about politics. That's actually saying that somebody's mind is broadened. They see the world from two different perspectives, as someone who's an English speaker or someone who's a francophone. So
yes, but that's not mainstream. That is not a mainstream thought. This is why you still have people running around, with this English only. Having English only, movements and the whole 9 yards. Language is political. In fact, the first thing that you do as a colonizer is to go in and change the language and impose your language and your sense of who people are. This is why the whole idea of, there's, these people are African. All these people are African, then all these people are white. And then all these people are this and that and the other thing. You know, this is a result of settler colonialism where people had their identities altered. You think about how people refer to Native Americans, okay? And it's always some degree. Oh, well, my great-great-grandmother was full-blooded Cherokee. Now, I'm not talking about your great-great-grandmother. I will tell you, though, that she was full of blood, as we all are. I can tell you that. Full-blooded Cherokee? Nah, no, there's no such thing. There's no such thing. But this is the way that we talk about Native people. Well, I'm a quarter. Okay, the whole issue of blood quantum. Okay, that's a European imposition. This is not what these folks have said about themselves, but this is what they have internalized. This is what they have internalized. And what they are finding is that their internalization of this is to their own detriment because they cannot marry, I mean, you have to really do that math. And you did ask me for a slide, and I wish that I had shown this one slide, and that is the slide when Thomas Jefferson, just look it up. There's a letter from Thomas Jefferson to Francis Gray, and I believe it's 1805 when he asks, how do you go from mulatto to white? Mm-hmm. He has this whole algebraic formula. You know how when you see, on TV, when the teachers write all this stuff all over the board, and you're like, okay, am I supposed to copy all this? But it looks like something from, like MIT, or MIT math class or something. That's what this looks like, So the language is important because it is political, but also you have to interrogate the language. And that's a lot of what I do. So it's not to see people take the language for granted, okay? And because language naturalizes and normalizes these things. But once you get under there and interrogate the language, then you can really begin to chisel out, and of course you have to have a historical context too, to go along with that. But, Jabari Assim, we were, some of us, I'm sure not all of us, Chappelle's SNL opening was a travesty to a lot of us this past weekend, and his use of the N-word. And, if I knew where he lived, I would send him Jabari Assim's book, The N-word, Who Should Say It, Who Shouldn't, and Why, because he gives such a great history of language and the use of language, and
very important to have use of language in America and to get a sense of who we are as Americans.
Yes.
So we thank you for that, Dr. Coleman. And Sarah Andrews, thank you very much. You've put up the letters of the founders on the archive so you can see the documents and the registration. We thank all of our audience for tuning in today. Appreciate it. As I said, this is to open our minds, learn something that we didn't know about before, and to explore new understandings. The one thing that I will say about the friends and supporters of the Wilson House is that you are intellectually curious, and that is why we bring these types of talks to you. If you're interested in supporting and sponsoring the series in the spring, please contact me. Otherwise, I hope to see you in the garden. Come and see Suffrage outside. I hope to see you outside taking walks in this beautiful weather in the Kalorama neighborhood, in the Waddy Butler Wood. And if you're interested in having parties, we have been using the rear garden for the Suffrage outside to host cocktail parties, safe outside, and events. So if you're thinking about the next best setting for an event, please contact us for that as well. Thank you all very much and have a great week. Bye.
Okay, I hope that you enjoyed this video as much as I did. So if you want to continue to support this channel, then subscribe, give this video a thumbs up, and continue to watch and support us. I have another video on my channel that I would like for you to check out this kind of like in reference to the same topic in reference to the same topic. And that video was done by a historian by the name of Muhammad Salam. And I interviewed him about, was talking about the indigenous Black Indians. And I would like you to check that video out also, because that video, we covered some other avenues as far as like the developments that took place. And some of this was that we were talking about in the other video was dealing with the, what they call the so-called 5 civilized nations. And some of that information covered Florida and Louisiana and places like that. So check that video out too. And do give it a thumbs up and continue to watch. And we have another website called Uniquely For You that we sell products on. So I want you to check out that website, Uniquely For You, and do continue to support. All right, peace.